Okay, so we're going to build the first terrariums of the first iteration today. Now, I'm not an expert, and after procrastinating for a while, I decided to make these without doing any planning or research. So we'll be starting small, and we'll be working mostly with the supplies that I have on hand. We'll be using these jars that I've been hoarding because I collect empty jars. There's a bit of a secondary benefit to using these, which is that I can finally get rid of these jars without actually throwing away any of them because I don't want to throw them away. They're perfectly useful jars. They cost money to buy, even though you were paying for the stuff, but you're also paying for the package, so, you know, I want to get my money's worth for them. I don't want to throw them away. So I'm going to be using about half of these, mostly the cooler looking ones, although we're not focused on making these terraria actually look good, so maybe that's a bit of a waste of a good jar. Oh well, we're using these ones. Now, there's a lot of variables to be explored with even the basics of the terraria, like what kind of soil should be used, what kind of water, what kind of plants and animals. It turns out there's an awful lot to talk about there, so I'll be making another video for that. You should go watch it, assuming I get around to making it. But to boil it down, I've decided that for this first batch of terraria, we're going to make the following. 6 terraria with gravel false bottoms separated from the soil by a screen. The soil will be taken from the yard and the water will be tap water. 3 jars will be populated with small plants from my yard, and 3 will be populated with moss and a creeping fig plant that I bought at the hardware store. No animals will be deliberately added, but whatever bugs happen to make it in through the soil or through the yard plants will be allowed to stay. I'm not going to try to sterilize this soil. They're going to be placed, 2 of each, indoors, in the front yard, and in the backyard, respectively. At least, that was the plan. But I actually have a lot of these yard plants, and I kind of want to try mixing some in with the store-bought, so I'm going to make 7 jars instead. The dirt is basically just a mix of leftover potting soil and the clay dirt that is naturally present in my backyard. Some of these plants are going to have bits of soil adhering to their roots, so that'll contribute a little bit too. The result is a sort of non-uniform mix of sand, clay, and loam, and there's going to be some seeds and small insects from the outside getting in as well. So the plants are a mix of found plants from my yard and some store-bought moss and a creeping fig plant. I don't really know what the plants that I found in my yard are. The grass is grass, obviously, but what kind I'm not exactly sure. There's a lot of this little herby thing, which I called near clover because it vaguely resembles clover. I have since looked it up, and it's actually an annual called chickweed. It tends to die around summertime, so it's probably not going to last very long, but it will be interesting to see if it can reproduce and germinate into a new generation of plants next year. There's also a kind of ground-dwelling shrubby thing that vaguely resembles a local version of the creeping fig. And last, there's a small amount of actual clover. The soil also probably has some tiny seeds in it, so we could see something else sprouting in these jars later if we're lucky. I've deviated a bit from the plan here, but not by much. There's a little bit more mixing of store-bought and yard plants than originally intended, mostly because there's really more plants here than I have room for in all of these jars, and I wanted a little bit more plant diversity. So, first we wash the jars. The point is just to get the labels off so I can see inside and to let in light, and to remove most of the organic material so I don't have a lot of old tomato sauce rotting inside and throwing off the balance of the ecosystem. Second, we cut out the screens to separate the gravel substrate from the soil. This is window screening from Home Depot. It's cheap and easy to get, and that's basically the only criteria that went into selecting it. Small bits of dirt, roots, and insects can still get through if they're determined to do so, but that's basically fine. Then we fill the jars about an inch deep with gravel. Now, I'm recording the audio for this about 3 weeks after doing it, and in retrospect, I think this was a bit too much gravel, but that's what I did. Oh well. Then we insert the screens. Some of these screens are pretty hard to get into place, especially in the jars with narrow necks, the liquor bottles. I ended up using first a paintbrush handle and then a little bit of old coat hanger in order to manipulate the screens into place. The coat hanger actually worked pretty well. I didn't use any charcoal as a filter. Charcoal or activated carbon is commonly used to help filter the water in the environment and help keep it clean. I left it out partly because it seems like a non-renewable filtration source that will eventually get used up, so the terrarium results won't be really reliable, but mostly I just did it this way because I didn't have any charcoal around. After this, we pour in the dirt. Pretty straightforward. After that, we then place the plants inside. For the larger mouth jars, I was able to put my hand in and place them where I wanted. And I tried to just plant these evenly spaced around the area and push any roots into the soil a little bit so that they, have an easier time taking root. For the narrow mouth jars though, I couldn't do this, so I basically just shoved the plants and moss into the jar and poked things around as best I could with the coat hanger. I also found this little piece of wood with some moss or algae or something on it in my backyard, so I put it in one of the terrariums as well. The last thing to do is to add water. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much water to add, so I'm going to use this straw to add a couple of drops and just hope it's right. I'm going to err on the side of using too much water because it'll be visibly evident over the next couple of days if there's too much. But not enough water will be hard to determine because the jar will just appear dry, and that's about what I'd expect if there's about the right amount of water as well. If it turns out that there's too much water, we can always just open these up and let them air out for a while. Some of the water will evaporate and leave the jars while they're open, and doing this once or twice will probably let me dial things in to the correct amount of moisture in these terraria. So we ended up with 7 terraria. 2 of them are moss and creeping fig. 1 is grass with near clover, quote unquote, and creeping vine. 1 is near clover, clover and grass. 1 is moss, near clover and grass. 1 is moss and near clover, and 1 is just moss. And remember, by near clover, I mean the chickweed, but I'm referring to it as near clover because that's what I put on the labels at the time. And I'd like to be consistent here. Anyway, though, I've got a lot of these little plants I collected left over, and it'd be a shame to do nothing with them, and so I made an 8th terrarium with this pickle jar. This still had a pickle in it when I started making the other 7, but I was hungry at the end, so I ate it, washed it out, and just made another terrarium just to put the leftovers somewhere. So after this, I sealed up all of the jars and labeled them, except for the pickle jar. I also dated the sealed date for the moss-only terrarium. Theoretically, I ought to date all of these jars, but it's kind of tedious, so I didn't really bother. And after that, I ended up putting 2 of these, one of the moss and creeping fig, and the other one with the grass, near clover, and creeping vine on the front driveway. 2 of the terraria, the other moss and creeping fig terrarium, and the moss, near clover, and grass terrarium on the back steps, and the last 3 and the pickle jar went inside my kitchen on the windowsill. And that's it. To see how well these work out, whether they live or die, we'll just have to wait and see.